Hey guys, Bartel's Bookshelf here. I debated on whether I should make a video dedicated to this. I don't normally focus exclusively on male-male romance or smut in my videos, but I have talked about it in previous videos, and I had enough to say about these two books that I thought I could fit it into its own video. And as I've gotten older, I've just accepted that I'm a degenerate. As a wise man once said, do not kill the part of you that is cringe, kill the part that cringes. So here we are, I'm talking about gay smut, and if you're not into that, then I have plenty of other videos you can watch, but I want to talk about this, so I'm going to talk about it. Fuck you. So I read two books recently, one that I thought was pretty good, and one that was not so good. And they both kind of represent the dichotomy of smut. So the first book I read was called Wild by Adrienne Wilder. This was recommended to me by Nakia, plot twist, who had just read it recently, and the bits that she had shared with me sounded interesting, so I decided to check it out. This is the story of August, a young 20-something clothing model, very famous, who's in a relationship with a guy named Dan, who's also an underwear model. They're kind of, a power couple. And as they're traveling over Alaska one day, Dan admits to August that he's been cheating on him with a bunch of other dudes and some ladies. And August decides to break off the proposal. He had a ring that he was going to give him and everything. But then the plane crashes over the Alaskan wilderness. And seemingly everyone is dead, and August is left there injured, left to the wilderness. But he gets saved by a mysterious mountain man named Keegan, who takes him back to his cabin, and who is living in the wilderness all by himself for mysterious reasons, mysterious past. And he takes care of August, helps him recover. And the rest of the book, just as you would expect, kind of follows their blossoming relationship as they're sort of stuck together in this situation. So as I mentioned, Nakia, plot twist, read this book and recommended it to me. And usually I trust her recommendation. She gives pretty good recommendations. And yeah, I really enjoyed this book. Those of you who have watched all my videos talking about some of these previous things know that when it comes to gay romance and erotica and things like that, I can be very picky, very critical. I don't know why. It's just it's just one of those things where it's like I get very, very picky about my romance and my smut. If one little thing feels off, it bugs me. It's why I've never really read a lot of romance or been into a lot of romance, because in my experience, a lot of the sort of tropes of romance really annoy me. And I was glad that this book avoided a lot of the tropes that kind of annoy me. I mean, first of all, it's very intense. Not many erotic novels that I've read open up with plane crashes and broken legs and being rescued and all that kind of stuff. Granted, a lot of romance novels are melodramatic, but so is a lot of other genre fiction. But I liked that it wasn't just melodramatic window dressing. I mean, we spend 80% of the book in this cabin. The author really takes the time introducing you to the Alaskan wilderness and to August and Keegan and their kind of dynamic and the way things work day to day, the healing process. One of the things that annoys both me and Nakia is when someone gets injured in a book like this, especially a book that's sold as hurt comfort, that kind of thing, and the actual hurt comfort part is 5 seconds. Someone will break their leg, and then they'll be healed 5 pages later after a time skip. We both hate that, and I really liked that they actually took a lot of time detailing August's recovery. It's not a case of we'll just put your leg in a splint and it's fine. I mean, it really goes into a lot of the medical complications, the need for antibiotics, even how August's leg doesn't completely heal correctly because, they're not in a hospital. That was one thing that really surprised me. There's a lot of detail, not just in terms of medical stuff, but in terms of just living out in the wilderness. There's a lot of talk about, the need to, keep out the cold, what do you do for food, all that stuff. I was actually really pleasantly surprised how it really dug into, the wilderness aspect of the story. Nakia and I both sort of noticed this. It felt very reminiscent of Jack London, that kind of thing, which is surprising for a book like this. And again, the second surprise was that it was actually pretty well written. There's a lot of spelling mistakes and typos and grammatical things, but having read quite a few of these sort of self-published male-male romance novels, erotic novels, I mean, you kind of just have to accept that as part of the territory. And it didn't really matter in this case because I enjoyed the book so much. But yeah, it really goes into Keegan and August's sort of emotional state. Keegan's been out in the wilderness for 10 years because he's avoiding his dark past. August has just been through this horribly traumatic event while also getting dumped by his ex. I mean, or having this horrible revelation about his ex, just a lot of emotional stuff piled on. And they really go into that and how that struggle of sort of being stuck together and having to sort of make things work, and like when you're that close to another person for so long, I mean, you can't help but just kind of develop that sort of intimacy. And so there's some question in the novel of, like, is this intimacy real? Is it just kind of Stockholm Syndrome kind of thing, because we're stuck out here? I liked that there wasn't a lot of sort of plot contrivances to, like, keep them together or to keep the story moving. I mean, there's contrivances, obviously, but they didn't necessarily, they felt realistic to the situation. They didn't feel tacked on, like, because the author was stuck and needed the story to go somewhere. In fact, Keegan actually does some pretty shocking things. Not shocking, but he does some pretty surprising things in the story that spoke to the fact that, these characters are flawed. I liked all of that stuff. And of course, the sex scenes were pretty well written, but I can't get into that on YouTube. Yeah, this one just really surprised me with sort of the lyricism of its writing. As I said, it really captures that sort of wild setting. There's, the way that it uses animals as kind of like metaphorical sort of props to sort of like further the themes of the story, the emotional themes of the story. As I mentioned, it felt very Jack London, which is surprising for a book like this. And Keegan and August are just really adorable. I mean, the way that the things that they learn about each other, the way that they sort of like explore each other throughout this, whole ordeal. My only issue with the book was the last third or like the last fourth of it, last 60 pages or so. The tone of the book completely shifts into this like shoot 'em up like action movie climax where they're taking out bad guys and stuff, and on top of that, the book throws in a lot more kind of plot developments kind of out of nowhere. Not out of nowhere, because they have been hinted at throughout the book, but the way that all these disparate plot elements were piled onto each other and all kind of like forced to sort of share the same space, I felt was a little bit overkill and kind of took me out of the story a little bit. But again, that's just me. Nakia didn't mind it. I was the only one who had a problem with it. As I said, I'm just very critical when it comes to these kinds of books. I don't know why, because normally I'm not like this critical about a lot of other things, but I guess just for romance, it's like it has to be like note perfect or like it just completely falls off for me. But I'll also say that means when I really like something, that means I really like something and I think it's really good. So this book wasn't perfect. I didn't think the climax was all it could be. I liked where it ended up. I liked the actual ending. I'm not sure about how they got there. And, of course, as you would expect in a lot of books like this, the bad guys are just cartoons. They're cartoon character versions of bad guys. There's nothing redeeming about them. There's nothing nuanced or anything. But that's just how it is with a lot of these books. And a lot of books in general. So yeah, I had some issues with this one, but overall, I really enjoyed it. I gave it like 3.5 stars, which for me is like a lot for a book like this. I mean, for me to give a romance novel like 4 stars is like unheard of, and I think a 5 star is like some mythical beast that will never exist, never truly exists. So yeah, I had some issues, but I enjoyed that one. This next book I didn't so much enjoy. This book was Wolfe's Blessing by Blake R. Wolfe. I just ran across this randomly on Amazon because after reading the Van Helsing book, I was craving more werewolf stuff, more werewolf stuff like that in that sort of gothic mode. Big beastly monsters of the hunt, but gay, but really, really gay. And a lot of this is part of a bigger rant that I don't have time to get into, but a lot of sort of the shifter romance stuff just really doesn't interest me. A lot of it, again, is just so tropey. The Omegaverse, like Mpreg, like the ABO type stuff, like it just doesn't appeal to me. Like I'm not so much into the werewolves that are like rigid, divided into packs, with the alpha, omega, and betas and all that type of shit. And when I want werewolves, I just want beasts, like wolfish beasts, and something in the vein of like, World of Darkness, that type of thing, like I'm not so much into the rigid tropey structures of things, if that makes sense. So it's really hard when you go looking for gay werewolf novels on Amazon, because there's a lot of them, but a lot of them fit into that kind of generic sort of Omegaverse, Shifterverse umbrella, and a lot of that stuff just doesn't really appeal to me. But this didn't claim to have any of that. This just claimed to be a straightforward fantasy story in the vein of like sort of a Dungeons and Dragons kind of thing that had a big burly werewolf and a twinky little mage in it. So I was all over that. It sounded right up my alley. Oh boy, this book. I actually took notes on this. That's how much I had to say. So this book follows Ronan, who is the werewolf, and Dante, who is a mage. This takes place in a world where non-humans like orcs and dragonborn and those kinds of people are very much looked down upon, sort of treated as second-class citizens, but especially werewolves. And so Ronan, as a werewolf, is very sort of careful to guard his secret. But he works as a mercenary and uses the money from being a mercenary to kind of rescue twinks that he feels sorry for, but he can never he never hopes to find the one, blah blah blah. And he ends up meeting with this mage named Dante, who coincidentally happens to work for this order that is very much they're basically like they're kind of like the Catholic Church, like back in the Renaissance era. They're sort of the heads of the true heads of state kind of thing, and they're very vehement about their hatred of werewolves and other non-human beasts. So of course they hate each other right off the bat, but they have to go on a mission together to destroy this giant crystal worm creature for reasons that I don't care enough to get into. And of course they end up falling in love and fucking and all that good shit. As I said, sounds right up my alley, right? If you know me, that's my thing. Big werewolf, small twink, forced proximity, enemies to lovers. All of these are good things. Oh boy, where do I begin? So first off, the first thing I noticed as I was reading this was the writing. The writing is just so shoddy. One of the things that really stuck out to me, on a prose level, it's not the worst I've ever read. The sentences all make sense. They don't use weird words or metaphors, you know what I mean? Like, it's not overloaded with too many spelling errors for once, like, it's perfectly fine, prose-wise. But, like, the tone is weirdly modern. All of the dialogue and the narration and everything. This is supposed to take place in like a D&D style sort of medieval fantasy world kind of thing, but everybody talks like they're from Southern California. Like, everyone's like, "What's up, bro?" Or like, "Oh, that sucks, man." And like, there's like way too much cursing. Like and I'm not one who's like, I don't get up in arms about cursing. I curse like a sailor, but like, there are times where it's definitely used as a crutch, and this is one of them. Characters like curse all the time, even if it doesn't make any sense. Like, fuck this, fuck that, fuck you. Like, it's like a Sopranos episode. But I've never really been a fan of that in fantasy personally, because again, I mean, partially I think it feels a little bit too modern. There are times where it works. Like if you're working in sort of a more gritty type of setting, like a Game of Thrones or like Joe Abercrombie or that kind of thing. Like, I'm not against it. But the way it was just, like, constantly piled on throughout this book just felt very amateurish and shoddy and very much like the author had trouble thinking of sort of clever things for the characters to say, so he just kind of replaced it with curse words. And as I said, like, the speech is just very casual from everybody. Again, even if it doesn't make sense. So as I said, Dante's whole thing in this book is that he's a monk, or, well, he's a mage slash monk, he's a cleric, whatever, an acolyte for this order. They like keep all their people sheltered from the outside world. They hate anything non-human. They're very strict. They're very regimented. And yet, like, Dante's just walking around, just talking like, "Hey, bro," like he has a friend named Calder, I think, or something like that. And he's just walking around like, "Hey, bro, what's up? Like, spill the beans." You know what I mean? Like, and cursing like a sailor. Like, "Fuck you, fuck this." And like, it doesn't read as someone who has been isolated for a long time. His backstory is that he was taken off the streets when he was 13 because he was seen to have a magical aptitude, and every person who has like a magical aptitude is shipped off to this order or whatever. And it just doesn't strike me as somebody who not only has been isolated in this place since they were 13, but also is like fully buying into sort of the brainwashing of their order. But he's just talking like a normal dude. It just felt really strange. And then once we get into the actual plot, like it's rushed. The book itself, it was listed as 233 pages, but when I actually started reading the book, it's more of like 191, because the rest of it is taken up by a long preview of one of the author's other novels. So it's sub 200 page romance novel, erotic novel, whatever you want to call it. And so like everything is just rushed. Within like 3 chapters, they're already all together, and like the werewolf and the mage are like being snooty to each other and thinking about how hot they are and stuff. And and the plot itself is just totally perfunctory. It's just typical, like we live in this oppressive place, so we have to work together to defeat this creature. But then there's a deeper conspiracy, and it's just very hundreds of D&D campaigns, you know what I mean, have been told about this. The bad guys are like cartoonishly bad. The world is super underdeveloped. There's a lot of interesting ideas. You know, you have these mages who are sort of serve as this like symbol, you know, of like this oppressive regime. They talk about there was like a war with the elves where like the elves were like wiped out or like pushed out of their country. There's mention of this thing that the werewolf is part of called the Brotherhood, which is like this sort of self-policing guild of werewolves, kind of. But none of this is really expanded on. It's all just kind of given in quick expository dumps. And the thing is, I can accept all of that if the romance is good, because after all, this is primarily a romance novel, so that is where you would expect the focus and the kind of effort to be. But even the romance is underdeveloped as hell. It's insta-love. The minute they see each other, basically, they're like fawning over each other, even if they don't outwardly show it. You know, they're fucking slavering over how hot they are, to the point where like throughout the book they keep repeating to themselves, you know, in narration, in thought, why am I so attracted to this guy? I barely know him. I don't know anything about him. Why am I so attracted to him? Blah blah blah. It feels like the author is moving the characters into places where they don't want to naturally go. So the characters are thinking to themselves how this doesn't make sense, but they're moving there anyway. As I said, like, I love a good enemies to lovers, you know, like, you can do a lot of great stuff with that. That is, like, ripe for melodrama and character arcs and potential. But it's not even really an enemies to lovers thing. It's like, they're just, like, snippy and snooty with each other throughout, like, a good third of the book, which isn't even fun to read because it's not clever. Their sort of snippy insults amount to, you know, just saying fuck you or you're a dick. There's one bit where Dante calls Ronan Stinky or whatever, you know, because he's a werewolf, wet dog, whatever. He calls him Stinky, and like Ronan is all like he's all angry and huffy, you know, and he can't think of a comeback, you know. So it's like I could have bought that if it was a thing where, you know, Dante, you know, he's supposed to be a mage who's been cooped up for a long time, so it's like this is his best idea of an insult. Like, that would be funny. But instead, like, Ronan acts like he just got, like, a sick burn on him by calling him Stinky. Like, that's, like, third grade level shit, you know? It really felt like a thing of, like, the author wrote something and then was like, I'll go back and, like, make it cleverer or make it better, you know, make it more witty later, and then they just didn't. And as with all great romances, you know, once they do start kind of exploring their feelings for each other, things get melodramatic real quick. You know, they've been in these crystal mines for at most a day and a half, and they're like expressing their love for each other, and like, or even if they're not outwardly expressing their love for each other, like their thoughts are like jumbles of like, you know, oh, like, I have all these feelings, and what does he think of me, and blah blah blah, and he's so hot, but why do I feel this way? Because I hate him, and I've only known him for like a day, you know, like, why do I feel this way? Which leads me on to this lazy storytelling device where during this fight with like a bunch of goblins, Dante does this like magic thing where he creates this kind of orb of healing around the party, you know, to make him heal everybody. It's like an area of effect healing spell, basically. That creates this kind of bond between him and Ronan that sort of semi kind of telepathically links them a little bit. Like, it makes them like sympathetic to each other, I guess you'd say. And throughout the entire book, we're hearing over and over again about this bond, this mysterious bond. Why do I feel this way? What, you know, like, oh, it's what is with this mysterious bond? Like, oh, I can't ignore this bond, you know? And it's just like, it just felt so lazy. It feels like the hand of the author reaching down and shoving their chess pieces into wherever they need them to be, even if it doesn't logically make sense and the characters don't naturally want to move there. But they have this bond, then they have to be together. You know, they're fated mates to be together. You know, which is another trope that I hate. When it's done badly. So it's like they're being moved into these places that don't make sense for them to go because the author needs them to be there. And it was so aggravating, and they just kept circling the well of the same stuff over and over again. I just didn't buy a single word of any of it, you know. It really just felt tossed off quickly by somebody who wasn't experienced in writing. Everything about the book is subpar. I mean, the ancillary characters, you know, you don't even need them. You could have cut them completely out of the book and it would have been totally fine, except for a few cases. The rest of the party only exists to basically support the romance, you know? Like, we hear about all these other party members that they're traveling with, but they don't matter. Like, completely forget about them. They are not important. To the point where, like, it was almost comical, like, Ronan and Dante are like ignoring the team. So I was like imagining, like the team's off, in one area, fighting off this giant worm, and while Ronan and Dante are like making eyes at each other, and they're screaming in the background like, somebody help, we need a healer, and they're just like fawning over each other, And on top of that, I really liked the idea of Dante, because this whole thing was that he was supposed to be sort of a dumb twink mage who was, sheltered from the world, didn't know a lot of things. Once he's like with the traveling group and they're going into these mines, he's like totally different off the bat. He's like, being like snooty and uppity and like being mean to everybody. And they kind of talk about that. There's like one line about how like he's kind of putting on airs to impress them, or like to sort of fit better into his role as a mage of his order. But as I mentioned, I mean, the author's idea of being clever is him calling the werewolf Stinky and acting like that's a sick burn. So like the snootiness and the snippy behavior, the back and forth, like the verbal sparring, isn't even really fun to read, so why? And then on top of that, okay, so I haven't really delved into spoilers. I'm going to talk a little bit about spoilers now because I have to. So if you don't want to be spoiled somehow, for some reason, there you go. Dante turns out to be a complete and total fucking Gary Stu. He just so happens to be the one mage who has these incredible powers of not only both healing, but of necromancy. So he has the power of life and death, and he just so happens to accidentally unlock these powers during this goblin fight, and it's like, whoa, and he's like uber special. He doesn't even it's not even really established that he has to like work hard to use his magic. Like the healing magic a little bit, but like when he does the necromancy, he just kind of like, boop, touches things and they die, and it's like, it's just so, I don't know. But not only that, so what happens is, of course they find out that the fucking order is corrupt and they're doing all this bad shit, but during the big fight with this crystal worm, Ronan basically gets stabbed through the chest with one of the crystals, and he's essentially dead. But then, the literal fucking goddess of his order comes down, the Lady of the Twilight, I think her name is, the goddess of the order comes down to him in a vision and says, hey, you love this man so much that I'm going to resurrect him for you. And also, you're right, he's right, our order is fucked up and they're not following my teachings. And you're so special, you have the power of life and death, and you care for this man so much that I'm going to not only bring him back alive for you, I'm going to fucking make you my champion, and you are going to like spread the word for me. Why? I don't know, because he loves a random werewolf that he met for less than a day a lot, and he was... And that leads to another thing that I thought was really funny, because at one point they had a literal Deus Ex Machina. Literal Deus Ex Machina. The goddess of his order literally came down and blessed him with fucking epic powers and made him her champion. Made him her champion. And even after all of that, after he's been struggling throughout the book about is the order really evil? And his literal goddess came down and told him that the order was evil. He's still like, well, I don't really know about that. Like, yeah, the goddess herself said it, but I still have to think about it a little bit, and I need to find some proof first. It was like, I don't even know. It's just bad. I took notes for this, but there's no hope of having any semblance of organization on this. I mean, it was very disappointing, and I get it. I'm not shitting on struggling writers who are just trying to, they're following their passion, they're putting their stories out there, they're working at it, maybe they're not experienced, whatever. But you're asking for money for this, you know what I mean? Like I got this for free because it was on sale or whatever, but I think normally it was like $5. And if I had spent $5 on this, I would have felt so cheated. So I'm not trying to be an asshole by being so critical, but like when you're charging money for your stuff, I mean, you have some pride in your work. Hold it up to some sort of standard, I mean, there's so much more, like, aside from all of the plot stuff that I've talked about in the writing, I mean, there's like all these like cringy moments, like parts of it that read like really bad, like fan fiction. There's literally this whole scene where Dante, is finally warming up to Ronan, and he tells him, like, I want to know everything about you. Can you show me the light? And Ronan has this whole thing about, I can't bring you into the light, but I can bring you into the darkness where people like me dwell. I mean, like My eyes nearly fell out of my head. They were rolling so hard. And again, as I often run into with a lot of these types of books, there's just errors everywhere. Not as many as Wild, but they were more egregious in this because I wasn't enjoying the rest of the book, and some of it was just straight up funny. There's this one bit where Ronan's talking about his life and how he became a werewolf, and instead of saying when I came to a couple days later, he says when I finally came a couple days later. Not the kind of coming that, I mean, it is the kind of coming you would think you'd read about in a book like this, but not in this scenario. What was another one? Oh, there's this one bit where he's talking about Ronan is, of course, like a raging atheist, and a lot of the stuff he says about atheism just feels very, like, milady. And there's a bit where he says, gods are just made up to men, have an excuse to be terrible. But the best error that I ran across in this book that I laughed at so much that I actually had to take a picture of it. There's a bit towards the end of the book where Ronan is trying to shift, but he can't because of, like, some magical chains. So instead of saying unable to shift, it says unable to shit. I'm sorry, I laughed, okay? But the worst, aside from all of that, the one thing that really annoyed me about this book, and I didn't even realize this until I was toward the end, Ronan is a werewolf, and he only completely changes once in the entire book. I bought this book because it has a big, burly, manly, hairy werewolf in it, and we only see him in that form once when he reveals himself to everybody. He like attempts to change, and there's like a few half changes at certain points. He never like completely changes, and we never really get a sense of like being a werewolf, really. So really, you could have like he could have been anybody. He could have been just some magical monster dude. I mean, like, why did you write a book about a werewolf if you're not going to utilize those things? Like. And I think that's kind of what annoys me. I'm going on a totally other tangent. That's one of the things that annoys me about a lot of these kind of like werewolf shifter romances is that the werewolf stuff, the shifter stuff, it's window dressing. It's there because they need someone to be like monstrous and kind of gruff and rough and big tough alpha man, you know, and like, but they don't really do anything with the werewolfism. They don't explore it in any unique way. They don't. They could have been anything. They could have been a vampire or whatever, you know, and it wouldn't have made a single fucking difference to the story. And it was the exact same with this. And because the whole reason that I picked this up was because I wanted more werewolf stuff. Like, that really annoyed me. I'm going on and on and on and on and on and on. But you get the idea, you know, like. And the thing that's so frustrating as well is that these, as I mentioned, these individual elements aren't bad, and they could be really interesting. I was like really into the setup, you know, I was like digging it, but the execution on so many levels is just terrible, you know? So yeah, I don't even know. I've been burned way too many times by this stuff. So I'm asking anybody out there who is any legitimately interested in any of this stuff, are there any male werewolf books or anything that aren't complete garbage? Because there's millions of these things out there, and I'm tired of sifting through the slush pile of Amazon trying to find something that doesn't make me want to rip my hair out. I mean, I've already lost most of it, you know? I can't tear out anymore. I don't even know what this video became. Like I said, I took all these notes, but there's no hope of this being organized, so yeah, I think I've given enough reasons as to why I dislike this book. I'm not shitting on, you know, a working author. You know, if you love doing this stuff and it makes you happy, keep writing. That's great. You know, writing is awesome. I love writing. I don't publish anything, but I write, you know, as a hobby, and I enjoy it. But man, like, maybe just before you start putting your stuff out there and asking for people to pay hard-earned cash for it, I mean, maybe think about refining things a bit. Take a bit of pride in your craft. Read more. You know, I mean, I'm not trying to be condescending, I'm really not, but when you're asking people to pay for this stuff, you should expect a little bit of higher standard, you know what I mean? I think that's fair, you know? So, I don't know, man. So yeah, that was fucking Wolfe's Blessing. That was my ramble about gay books. I don't even know. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This turned out way fucking... whatever. What am I talking about? I'll see you guys next time. Bye.